I stared at the letter in my hand, feeling my blood start to boil. The audacity, the sheer nerve of these people was astonishing. The Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association was demanding that I remove my boat from my lake within 48 hours or face a $500 per day fine. They even threatened to have it towed at my expense. I couldn't help but laugh at the condescending tone. Dripping with self-importance, these pompous bureaucrats had no idea who they were dealing with. They'd been using my family's lake for years without permission, and now they were trying to dictate rules to me on my own property. This was going to be interesting. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because you're about to enjoy watching these entitled HOA tyrants get exactly what they deserve. In one of the most satisfying takedowns I've ever pulled off. My name is Jake Sullivan. Until 6 months ago, I was just another overworked software engineer grinding away in Silicon Valley. I'd spent the last decade building a cybersecurity startup for financial institutions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was challenging and paid well. When a major tech conglomerate offered to buy the company for a sum with more zeros than I'd ever dreamed of, I decided it was time for a change. At 40 years old, financially secure, and completely burned out, what I needed was peace and quiet away from constant hustle and never-ending meetings. That's when I remembered the lake house. Sullivan Lake had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, once a commercial fisherman turned conservationist, had bought the 50-acre lake and surrounding land in the 1950s, when the area was still wild farmland and forest. He built a simple cabin on the shore and spent his retirement fishing, riding, and teaching local kids about respecting nature. I have vivid memories of summers there learning to fish, listening to Grandpa's stories about when the water was so clear you could see 20 feet to the bottom. He was a local legend, known for standing up to a mining company that once tried to destroy the surrounding watershed. "Water is life, Jake," he used to say, his voice rough but kind. "Not just for the fish, but for all of us. Never let anyone convince you that profit matters more than protecting what nature gave us." Those words stayed with me, even as I built a tech career thousands of miles away. My father maintained the property, but rarely used it. He was more of a city guy and never really connected with the lake the way Grandpa and I did. After Grandpa passed at 92 and my father died unexpectedly at 67 from a heart attack, the lake and the cabin became mine. I hadn't visited in nearly 5 years, too busy with investors, product launches, and the brutal pace of the tech world. But now, it felt like the perfect escape. I had the cabin renovated, preserving its rustic charm but adding essentials like good plumbing and reliable internet, and moved in just as winter gave way to spring. The peace was exactly what I needed. Mornings on the dock with coffee, afternoons doing small projects, and evenings drifting in my little fishing boat watching the sunset. Stress melted away, replaced by the steady rhythm of nature. It was perfecta until the HOA decided to start throwing their weight around. That morning had started like any other. I got up with the sun, made a pot of strong coffee, and walked down to the dock. There, tied up as always, was my 16-foot aluminum fishing boat. It wasn't fancy, just a simple, practical vessel, perfect for solo fishing trips. It had belonged to my grandfather, and though it was weathered, I kept it in great shape. There was something grounding about using the same boat he had for decades as trailing my fingers in the water, watching the familiar shoreline. That's when I noticed a garish neon orange notice taped to the side of the boat with waterproof tape. "Violation notice," it screamed in bold black letters. I peeled it off and read through the nonsensy something about unauthorized watercraft and violations of community aesthetic standards. Apparently, my boat didn't meet their visual guidelines and needed to be removed from community waters. It also claimed all boats must be registered with the HOA and display special stickers. I laughed, thinking it had to be a prank, until I walked back to the cabin and found a formal letter in my mailbox, complete with HOA letterhead and the signature of one Richard Wilkins, HOA president. I was still reading it when my phone rang. It was Ray Delgado, my closest neighbor and one of the few people I'd gotten to know since moving in. Ray was in his mid-70s, had known my grandfather well, and lived about a quarter-mile down the shore in a house he built himself 50 years ago. He was a retired carpenter, tanned from decades of outdoor work, and had hands like sandpaper. Despite the age gap, We bonded quickly over fishing and a shared dislike of red tape. "Morning, Jake. I see the welcoming committee finally found you," he said with a dry chuckle. I told him about the notice and the letter, and he sighed. "Those HOA vultures have been getting more aggressive every year," he said. "Ever since they built that fancy development on the north side 10 years ago, they've acted like they own everything within 5 miles. Your grandfather would have run them off with a shotgun full of rock salt." The mental image made me green. Grandpa Sullivan was definitely not one to tolerate nonsense. I asked Ray if he'd had any run-ins with them. "Oh yeah," he said. "They once tried to fine me for my boat shed being unsightly." I told Wilkins where he could shove his violation notice. Haven't heard from them since. But trust me, they're just waiting for me to keel over so they can harass whoever buys my place. Then he said something that really stopped me. "You should know, they've been using your lake for their fancy fishing tournaments for years. They've even got a private club called the Elite Anglers or some such nonsense. Bunch of weekend warriors with overpriced gear who couldn't catch a cold." That caught me off guard. I hadn't even thought to check whether anyone was using the lake during the years it sat vacant. I assumed people still respected private property. Apparently not. After hanging up with Ray, I started digging online, and sure enough, the Maple Creek Estates HOA website was filled with photos from their annual lakeside fishing derby. Smiling guys in expensive gear holding up fish from my lake. The Elite Anglers Club even had a dedicated page, bragging about their exclusive access to prime fishing waters. Dozens of photos showed large events on the eastern shore of the lake. Definitely on my land, complete with tents, BBQs, even a temporary dock. The latest post promoted a huge tournament scheduled for the following weekend, complete with a $5,000 prize and a catered barbecue. They were planning a major event on my property without asking. I kept scrolling through years of photos, growing more furious. They'd clearly been doing this for at least 5 years, taking full advantage of the property sitting idle and gradually acting like they owned it. One post even referred to Sullivan Lake as our community's crown jewel. I needed legal advice, fast. So I called my old college friend Emma Porter. We'd kept in touch over the years, and she was now an environmental lawyer specializing in land use and water rights. Exactly what I needed. "Wait, let me get this straight," she said after I explained. "You actually own the lake? Like, the deed to the lake bed and water rights?" I confirmed I did. She laughed. "Oh, this is rich. And they've been using it for events without permission? Jake, that's trespassing. Plain and simple." I asked what I should do. "Don't respond to their notice yet," she said. "Let's gather evidence first. If they've been at this for years, we'll want a paper trail before they can try to erase it. I'll drive up this weekend and we'll go through all your documents and make sure everything's locked in. Meanwhile, set up some cameras. I have a feeling this is going to get interesting. And whatever you do," she added, "don't let them take your boat. If they try, that's theft. Document everything." I followed her advice. I installed wireless security cameras in strategic spots around the lake, especially in areas where the HOA held their events. The cameras were discreet but high-def, with night vision and motion alerts that pinged my phone. I also searched through my father's old filing cabinet and found all the original deeds and documents. Everything was clear. Sullivan Lake, including the water rights and land extending 15 feet beyond the high water mark, was 100% mine. There was even a survey map from 2010 confirming the exact property boundaries. While reviewing the documents, an email arrived, an invitation to the upcoming HOA meeting. It was clearly a mass email, not addressed to me personally. Curious to see these people in action, I decided I'd attend as an observer. It would be my first chance to meet Richard Wilkins and the HOA board, and I wasn't about to miss it. The Maple Creek Estates Community Center was a pretentious structure complete with marble columns and a fountain out front, as if trying far too hard to impress. I slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back. About 30 people were scattered throughout the room, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Richard Wilkins appeared just as I'd imagined. Mid-50s, silver hair meticulously styled, wearing a navy blazer with shiny gold buttons. His country club smile never quite touched his eyes. He ran the meeting with the inflated self-importance of a small-town tyrant, droning on about lawn heights and mailbox designs like they were matters of national security. Then he got to the lake. I straightened in my seat. We've had reports of an unauthorized boat being stored on community waters, he said, his tone clipped with irritation. I want to remind everyone that all watercraft must be registered with the HOA and comply with our aesthetic guidelines. The lake is one of our most valuable assets, and we must preserve its pristine appearance. I couldn't help myself. I raised my hand. Wilkins paused, caught off guard by the interruption. Clearly, audience participation wasn't part of his usual routine. He nodded reluctantly. Yes, the gentleman in the back? I stood, keeping my tone polite but inquisitive. When you say a community waters, could you clarify what you mean? Who exactly owns the lake? A ripple of whispers spread through the room. A few people turned to look at me with renewed interest. Wilkins' smile faltered just slightly. The lake is a community resource under home management, he replied dismissively. It's been that way since the development was built. But does the HOA actually hold the deed to the lake? I asked. Or is it county property managed under agreement? Now I had the room's full attention. One older man even nodded, clearly intrigued. Wilkins gripped the podium a little tighter. There are historical arrangements in place. The specific details aren't relevant here, but I assure you, the HOA has full authority to regulate lake activity. His voice had sharpened, his composure cracking. I just smiled, unfazed. That's interesting. I'd love to see those documents sometime. Just out of curiosity. Before he could respond, he pivoted to the next agenda item. But I caught the quick glance he exchanged with a woman I'd later learn was Karen Mitchell, the HOA vice president. I could feel their eyes flicking toward me for the rest of the meeting, no doubt wondering who I was and why I was stirring the waters. As the crowd began to disperse, a man approached. He was in his 60s, tanned and weathered, with a firm handshake and the quiet confidence of someone used to getting his way. He wore a pricey fishing vest over a polo and a hat with an embroidered logo. Gerald Thompson, he said, president of the Elite Anglers Club. Haven't seen you around before. New to the neighborhood? I told him I'd recently moved into my family's old cabin on the lake. His eyebrows lifted. The old Sullivan place? That's been empty for years. We figured it was abandoned. There was something calculated in his gaze that made me uneasy. It's not abandoned, I said evenly. Still very much Sullivan property. I'm Jake Sullivan and my grandfather built that cabin. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Sullivan, a broken bar, right? I met your grandfather once. Quite a character. The way he said it wasn't exactly complimentary. Well, welcome back, he said, choosing his next words carefully. We have a wonderful fishing club, very exclusive. I might be able to get you in. We have access to the best spots on the lake. The irony of him offering access to my lake wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. That sounds interesting. When's your next event? He brightened. Our annual championship next Saturday on the East Shore. Biggest event of the year. You should come by. I thanked him, already thinking about how I could use the tournament to gather evidence of their trespassing. As I turned to leave, I heard hushed voices behind me. Richard Wilkins, Gerald, and Karen huddled near the refreshments. I casually poured myself a bad cup of coffee and strained to listen. A broken bar. Accelerate the timeline. A broken bar. Deal with the Sullivan situation before it's too late. A broken bar. Karen glanced toward me. Then they moved away, speaking more quietly. But the message was clear. My presence had disrupted whatever they were planning and they didn't like it. I stepped outside and called Emma to update her. They're definitely hiding something, she said after I relayed the meeting. Wilkins refusing to answer about the lake ownership? That says everything. And the part about a timeline sounds like they've got a major plan in motion. She was coming up the next day. We agreed to go through the property documents together. Just as I hung up, a sleek black BMW pulled into the lot. The window rolled down to Richard Wilkins. Mr. Sullivan, isn't it? His voice was cordial, his smile all teeth. I don't think we've been formally introduced. Richard Wilkins, the president of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. So I've heard, I replied. I understand you've moved into the old cabin on the lake. We should have a chat about bringing it up to community standards. I returned his fake smile. I wasn't aware my property fell under your HOA's jurisdiction. His expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. All properties in the area are part of our community vision, Mr. Sullivan. We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard. Your boat, For instance, it's a bit rustic for our tastes." The word rustic dripped with disdain. I tilted my head. "And what authority does the HOA have over boats on the lake?" He waved a hand, as if dismissing an annoying question. "The lake has been under HOA management for years." I gave a slow nod. "That's interesting, because according to my family's deed, Sullivan Lake has been private property since 1953. Has something changed?" His expression faltered, just for a second, then he recovered. "There may be some misunderstandings about historical arrangements," he said carefully. "Perhaps we should let our lawyers sort this out. In the meantime, I hope you'll comply with the HOA's request regarding your boat." "I'd hate to start things off on the wrong foot." A thinly veiled threat. I smiled. "I'll take your concerns under advisement." He drove off. But I knew one thing for certain, the battle had begun. When I got home, it hit me like a punch. My boat was gone, just a broken bar gone. In its place was a violation notice tacked to a post. Boat impounded for non-compliance with community standards, a $750 fine, a mandatory compliance agreement. If I didn't reclaim it within 30 days, it would be considered abandoned and sold at auction. I was furious, pacing the dock, fist clenched. Every impulse screamed at me to storm into Wilkins' office and demand answers. But I remembered what my grandfather used to say: "When you're angry, slow down, think sharper." This wasn't just about a boat anymore, it was about people trying to erase my family's legacy. I called the local sheriff's office to report the theft. The deputy was polite but useless. "Sounds like a civil matter between you and the HOA," he said. "These situations can get a broken bar complicated." Translation: the sheriff's department wasn't going to get involved. That night, I barely slept. But when Emma arrived the next morning, my anger had crystallized into resolve. We laid out every document we had on the dining table. Emma, with her legal background, went through them methodically. "These deeds are ironclad," she confirmed. "Your grandfather didn't leave any room for interpretation, and this county record. Look at this." She showed me the original development plans for Maple Creek Estates. They clearly acknowledged Sullivan Lake as private property and not part of the community. "They've been lying to their own residents," Emma said. "They've never had any right to regulate access." Even better, the security footage from my cabin showed multiple HOA members launching boats from my property, a clear trespassing. "Now we just need to find out what they're really after," she said. "Because it's not just about your boat." The answer came that afternoon, courtesy of Ray Delgado. "My niece works at the county planning office," he said. "She saw a preliminary application. Maple Creek Estates is pushing for a major expansion, a luxury resort, condos, a golf course, and a full marina." He paused. "They want to build it all on Sullivan Lake." The puzzle pieces finally fit. This wasn't about community rules or boats or grass high. This was a land grab, and they were running out of time. For a multi-million-dollar development project on land they didn't even own, they must have been laying the groundwork for years, gradually spinning the illusion that the HOA controlled the lake. They likely assumed the Sullivan family had either forgotten about the property or would be willing to sell. My unexpected return and all the questions I was asking had thrown a serious wrench into their scheme. That evening, Emma and I sat at the kitchen table with takeout from the local diner, plotting our next move. "We could go nuclear right away," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "Send a cease and desist, file trespassing charges, and demand they return your boat." "But that would be tipping our hand too soon," I said, taking a slow sip of beer. "I want to know more who's involved, what they're planning." So we went with a quieter strategy. Emma drafted a letter to the HOA board, politely requesting all documents related to lake ownership and management, along with details on the Elite Anglers Club's use of the lake. The wording made it seem like a simple inquiry, not a challenge. "This puts them on notice," she explained, "but doesn't show our full hand." We also decided to let the upcoming fishing tournament play out as planned. Security cameras would record everything at every boat, every trespass. The more evidence we had, the better. Meanwhile, I received a formal letter from Steve Barnes, the HOA's lawyer. It repeated the demand to follow HOA rules and threatened legal action if I interfered with community operations. But the letter was full of vague references to historical precedent and community standards, without citing any actual legal authority over my property. Emma helped me draft a measured response, We acknowledged receipt of the letter but made no commitments. It bought us time. This actually works in our favor, she said. If they had legal standing, their lawyer would have cited it. The fact that he didn't speaks volumes. Next, I reached out to Sarah Lynn, a local newspaper reporter. Ray had mentioned it as someone with a history of covering HOA abuses. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe away from the prying eyes of Maple Creek Estates. Sarah was sharp, mid-30s, and intensely focused. I told her parts of the story enough to pique her interest, without revealing our full strategy. So they've been using your lake without permission, she said, scribbling in her notebook, and now they're trying to keep you from using it yourself? That's classic HOA overreach. But this development angle, that's the real story. She'd heard whispers about a major project but hadn't found anyone willing to go on record. If they're building on private property without consent, that's a scandal. I asked her to hold off on publishing for now but to dig into the investors and permits. She agreed. The day before the fishing tournament, Richard Wilkins showed up unannounced. I had just finished my morning coffee and was reviewing camera footage when the doorbell rang. This time, he looked different, less smug. No blazer, just a button-down shirt. Trying to appear casual. "Mr. Sullivan," he said with a plastic smile, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I understand you're upset about your boat. I'm sure we can work something out." I let him in. Curious, he commented on the cabin renovations with a condescending tone that barely passed for polite. "The HOA is willing to make an exception," he said, settling onto my couch. "You can keep your boat on the lake, no problem. All we ask is you sign this agreement acknowledging the HOA's role in managing lake activities." He handed me a document. It was laughably self-serving, basically asking me to surrender my rights in exchange for a permission slip to use my own property. "And the fishing tournament tomorrow?" I asked casually. "Does this agreement cover that too?" His eyes narrowed. "You know about that?" I shrugged. "Gerald Thompson invited me." Sounded like a big event. "It's a community tradition," Richard said, now visibly uneasy. I glanced at the paper again. "And the resort? The one they're planning on the lakefront, does this agreement include that too?" That caught him off guard. He hesitated. "I'm not sure what you've heard. Any development would follow proper channels. This agreement is just about basic usage guidelines." He waved it off, trying to downplay it, but his posture had tightened. "I'll need my lawyer to look at this," I said. "She's quite interested in the lake's legal status." His smile faded. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm trying to be reasonable. There are economic opportunities here, benefits for you too. If you're willing to be cooperative, there is also the veiled bribe." "I'll think about it," I said. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate my boat back." He stood, clearly displeased. "We'll see what we can do, but cooperation goes both ways." This could turn into a long, unpleasant fight. Thinly veiled threat. Once he left, I called Emma to update her. He practically admitted they have no claim. I told her, and he hinted at cutting me in on the deal. Emma wasn't surprised. Classic move via intimidation, then a payoff offer. We finalized our plan for the tournament. Emma would attend as my guest, and we'd document everything but stay hands-off. The real move would come later. Tournament day dawned clear and warm, a perfect fishing weather. From the cabin deck, I watched truck after truck arrive on the eastern shore. Gerald Thompson was orchestrating the event like a circus ringmaster. Tents, tables, even a makeshift bar. A huge banner read, 15th Annual Elite Anglers Championship, with the Maple Creek Estates logo front and center. At least 20 vehicles were already parked on my land. Emma arrived mid-morning, and we watched the scene through binoculars. "They're not even trying to hide it," she said. "I count at least 40 people in 15 boats on your property." Around noon, Richard returned, at this time with several well-dressed individuals carrying portfolios. "Not fishermen. Those must be the investors," Emma whispered. "He's giving them the pitch." We grabbed our cameras and moved closer, hidden among the trees. We could hear Richard talking. "Prime lakefront location. Exclusive access. We already control the entire waterfront, just a few final details to iron out." He handed out glossy brochures showing a massive resort complex. One investor, a woman in a designer suit, asked about landowners. Richard replied, "Minimal issues." One holdout, "We're negotiating. The HOAs managed this lake for years. Formal control is just a formality now. He was lying outright, implying I was nearly on board. That was enough. Emma and I pulled back to put our plan into motion. It was time to end this. While the tournament continued and the crowd partied on my property, Emma filed an emergency injunction with the county court, presenting clear ownership records and the immediate threat of trespass. The judge granted it on the spot. With legal protection in hand, we hired a security firm to post private property and no trespassing signs around the lake, especially near the tournament area. Then, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy, Emma and I walked straight into the crowd. The deputy called for attention. All heads turned. "This event is being held on private property without the owner's permission," he announced. "Everyone is being asked to vacate immediately." The reaction was instant to confusion, anger. Gerald stormed over. "What the hell is this? We've held this tournament for 15 years. Emma stepped forward, calm and composed. "Mr. Thompson, Sullivan Lake is private property. The HOA has never had legal authority to hold events here. We have a court injunction ordering everyone to leave." She held up the official document. That got their attention. Richard pushed through the crowd, investors watching from behind. "This is absurd," he shouted, completely losing his calm. "We've managed this lake for decades." Emma handed him the injunction and a copy of my property deed. "That is demonstrably false, Mr. Wilkins. County records clearly show the Sullivan family has held uninterrupted ownership since 1953. Richard Wilkins had been trespassing for years and now, finally, he was being exposed. "Furthermore," I added, "we have evidence you've misrepresented your authority to potential investors. That could constitute fraud." A murmur rippled through the crowd of anglers and spectators. Confusion turned into growing concern. One man stepped forward, identifying himself as a Maple Creek Estates resident. "We were told our HOA fees covered lake maintenance and access. Are you saying we've been lied to?" Heads nodded all around him. Emma replied gently but firmly, "I'm afraid so. The documents we reviewed clearly show that the HOA has been misrepresenting its authority over this lake for years." Voices began to rise in anger, now directed at Richard and the HOA board members standing awkwardly off to the side. The so-called investors were already edging back to their cars, wanting nothing to do with the unfolding scene. The sheriff's deputy raised his voice above the swelling noise. "Everyone, I need you to pack up your equipment and vacate the property. The court order is clear. I'm here to enforce it." Gerald Thompson was still arguing, but the crowd had already begun dismantling tents and loading their gear. Richard Wilkins stormed over and pulled me aside. His face was red with fury, voice low and sharp. "You have no idea what you've just done, Sullivan. I have connections in this county you couldn't begin to understand. This isn't over." I met his gaze without flinching. Years of Silicon Valley negotiations had hardened me against threats. "Actually, Richard, I think it is. And just so you know, I have recordings of you telling your investors that you control my lake and are in negotiations with me. That sounds a lot like fraud. I wonder what they'll think when they find out the truth." His face paled. He glanced nervously toward the retreating investors, clearly shaken. "This was just a broken bar, a misunderstanding," he muttered. "We can work something out." I shook my head. "That time has passed. You stole my boat. You tried to steal my lake. Now I need you to leave my property." As the last of the boats were hauled out, Sarah Lynn arrived with a photographer in tow. She had caught wind of the confrontation and was eager to get the story. Richard and the HOA board members refused to speak, hurrying to their cars, but many residents were more than willing to talk. "We pay over $5,000 a month in HOA fees," one woman told Sarah. "We were told that covered lake access and maintenance. If they didn't actually own the lake, a broken bar, where's all that money gone?" It was the question on everyone's mind. Sarah turned to me for my side. I gave her a straightforward account, showing the property deeds and the court injunction. "So what happens next?" she asked. I looked out at my now empty lake, peaceful once more. "Next, I get my boat back," I said. "Then we'll see what other surprises Mr. Wilkins has been hiding from his residents." The fallout was swift. Sarah's article ran on the front page the next day. By evening, the story had been picked up by regional outlets and was going viral on social media. The HOA called an emergency meeting. Emma and I attended, along with a packed room of angry residents. Richard Wilkins was conspicuously absent. Karen Mitchell tried to manage the crowd, but it was clear she was in over her head. Residents demanded answers about their money, about the lies, about everything. One by one, HOA board members resigned under the pressure. Emma and I watched from the back until I finally stood and addressed the room. "I don't have a problem with residents enjoying the lake," I said. "My issue is with the leadership that claimed rights they didn't have and tried to develop land that wasn't theirs. Maybe now, we can create something better, an arrangement that respects property rights while allowing responsible access." That helped. Several residents approached me afterward, apologizing and expressing a desire to work together. One older gentleman shook my hand and said, "Your grandfather would be proud. He always let kids fish from his sharia as long as they respected the lake." I hadn't known that. His words stuck with me. Emma's legal work continued to bear fruit. The county launched an investigation into the HOA's finances, particularly the misuse of lake maintenance funds. Meanwhile, Richard's development partners filed a lawsuit for misrepresentation. My boat was returned the next day, with a half-hearted apology from the newly elected acting president. Even the sheriff's office, embarrassed by how they had initially dismissed my claims, assigned a deputy to patrol the lake regularly until permanent boundaries and rules could be established. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me with a major update. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Richard Wilkins isn't even a licensed broker. He had his license revoked in Florida 5 years ago for doing the exact same thing. He operated under the name Richard Williams there. Same scam, same tactics. Apparently, he had narrowly avoided criminal charges in Florida by settling with victims. But now, with everything unraveling here, the county prosecutor was reviewing charges of fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds." Richard disappeared, reportedly leaving town in the middle of the night. Karen Mitchell claimed she knew nothing about his past, but emails recovered during the investigation suggested otherwise. In the months that followed, I worked with the remaining HOA members and residents to forge a new path. The new board was led by Michael Davies, the same older gentleman who had praised my grandfather. A retired judge, he brought integrity and wisdom, qualities the former board sorely lacked. Together, we founded the Sullivan Lake Conservation Trust, a non-profit that managed controlled public access while preserving the lake's natural beauty. Residents could now purchase annual access permits, with all proceeds going to conservation and maintenance. "This is how it should have been from the start," Judge Davis said. "Honest, transparent, respectful of property rights." We even revived the fishing club, now called the Sullivan Lake Anglers, open to everyone who respected the lake and followed conservation guidelines. Gone were the exclusivity and outrageous fees. As expected, Gerald Thompson wanted no part of the new system and quietly moved away. The area Richard had once earmarked for his resort, it became a small public park, complete with a fishing pier and picnic area. On opening day, I installed a plaque honoring my grandfather. It read, "Water is life, not a commodity to be bought and sold." I finally got around to repainting my boat, so still kept it a little rustic, though, just enough to remind me where it all started. On quiet mornings, I take it out to the middle of the lake with a fishing rod and a cup of coffee. Sometimes Ray Delgado joins me, sharing stories of the old days. According to him, my grandfather would have handled the HOA with more cursing and fewer court orders. Emma stopped by often. She was proud of what we'd built and helped ensure the legal framework we created would last long after I was gone. The no trespassing signs were replaced with Sullivan Lake Conservation Area markers, clear rules, clear boundaries, and a shared commitment to preservation. In the end, the real victory wasn't just winning the legal battle, it was turning a fight over land into a chance to build something better. The lake is healthier than it's been in years. Clearer water, more wildlife, more community. Last week, I found an old photo of my grandfather standing by this very dock, grinning, holding a massive bass. I framed it and hung it in the cabin. Every time I look at it, I feel his presence, his values, his strength. And every time I take my boat out on my lake, I smile. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about showing others a better way forward.